Ladies and gentlemen, beautiful people, welcome to the 97 Republic YouTube channel, where I react to news and live events of different sports. So I kindly ask that you hit the like button and the subscribe button, as that will really help this channel grow. And to ensure you don't skip a beat, click the notification bell as well. That way you can guarantee that you don't miss any of the action. Alright, so let's go. Ladies and gentlemen, beautiful people, in light of UFC Fight Night, Adesanya versus Imavov, I often ask the question, how did we get here? Now, what sequence of events led to both men having to face one another in a main event? And when answering such a question, I'd usually look at both fighters' respective UFC careers leading up to this point. Now, when looking particularly at Adesanya's UFC career, whether you are a hardcore fan, a casual fan, or even new to the sport, I'm pretty sure I have something to pique your interest. And when looking at Izzy's UFC career, it is indisputable that for the last 10 years, Israel Adesanya has been the best middleweight on the planet. And you can even make an argument in saying that Israel Adesanya is the most decorated striker the UFC has ever seen. And when analyzing his fights and breaking them down, it is easy to see why that argument would be valid. Now, Israel Adesanya has had 17 fights inside of the UFC. He has won 13 of them and he has lost 4 of them. And he made his debut all the way back in 2018, where he fought a guy named Rob Wilkinson. Now, Rob Wilkinson at the time had 11 fights, well, rather 12 fights, 11 wins, and 1 loss. Right? And Izzy at the time was undefeated. Now, even though Izzy was making his debut, he came from an organization called Glory Kickboxing. Right? Probably one of the biggest organizations regarding kickboxing in the world, where Izzy was champ, by the way. So there was already a lot made about Izzy's striking and just how good of a striker he is. But if you're new to the sport, right, you can ask any hardcore fan this. The way you exploit a striker's weaknesses is basically through wrestling, where a wrestler seems to be the kryptonite to a striker, purely because a wrestler dictates where the fight is taking place. If a wrestler decides that he wants to stand and strike with someone, he will. However, if the wrestler decides that he wants none of that, he'd probably try and take the striker down. Now, it doesn't mean that just because someone is a wrestler, they'd be able to dominate in wrestling. But 90% of the time, that is the case. And due to the fact that a wrestler dictates where the fight takes place, they have the upper hand. Now, keep that in mind as I tell you that out of Israel Adesanya's 4 fights at the start of his UFC career, his first 4 fights, 3 of his opponents was out-and-out wrestlers. Guys that their fundamentals are based off of wrestling. And Rob Wilkinson was one of those guys where he was a submission specialist. So he wanted to take his opponent down and try and submit them on the ground. And it was no different fighting Izzy. However, we'll see throughout Izzy's UFC career, not easy taking Izzy down. Not easy taking Izzy down. There we go. And it proved to be the case for Rob Wilkinson as well, where he basically got knocked out in the second round. Izzy wins his debut and goes on to fight Marvin Vettori next, a decorated wrestler. And even though that fight was close, Israel Adesanya ended up winning the fight. Now, people say it was somewhat controversial. I think most people had the scoreline exactly as how it played out. Then, in Izzy's next fight, he fought Brad Tavares, right? Went on to win by unanimous decision. Now, Brad Tavares is even to this day a perennial contender in the middleweight division, right? A tough SOB. Right? Hits hard, extremely durable. Izzy beat him in his 3rd fight. In Izzy's 4th fight, he went on to fight Derek Brunson, also a decorated wrestler. And in that fight, Derek Brunson didn't manage to take Izzy down once. And that is exactly the point. Where, with regards to Izzy's striking, the way he closes the gap, he closes the distance, the way he initiates the striking battle, and then basically avoids it, and ensuring that a wrestler would struggle to take him down. Usually with most conventional stances, A fighter's guard is higher, right? Basically just ensuring that he's able to block shots wherever they come from. Where with most highly decorated strikers, you'd see them fighting with a guard very low, right? Basically with their hands at their hips. And the reason for that is because when somebody tries to shoot a takedown on you, it is easier to try and avoid it. Right? Basically to sprawl when your hands are lower than to try and sprawl when your hands are higher. And that basically just emphasizes how good Izzy's striking is. Right? Not only is he managed to stuff takedowns, but he's also able to strike, engage, and basically leave the pocket in an instant. Meaning that he dictates what is happening in the fight. And we saw that with Derek Brunson, where Brunson wasn't able to take Izzy down once, only landed 3 strikes, and Izzy knocked him out. And after the Brunson fight, we saw Izzy getting matched up with someone that for the first time has somewhat of a similar skill set to Israel Adesanya. And you can make the argument that this guy is arguably the best striker the UFC has ever seen. And his name is Anderson Silva. Now, you can make the argument that Anderson at the time was past his prime and Izzy was entering his prime. Would have been incredible to see both face one another in their prime in a 5-round fight. But obviously, that's not how the universe works, right? So Izzy was basically almost at the peak of his powers where Anderson was past him. And Izzy dominated the fight. Right? Picked when to engage. At a distance, seeing that he is taller, has longer arms than Anderson Silva, he basically dictated the fight from the get-go and won via unanimous decision. And then the Israel Adesanya reign started. And I'll give you a stat at the end, which is pretty alarming in a sense of how incredible it is. And so after beating Anderson Silva, Israel Adesanya goes on to fight Kelvin Gastelum. Now, if you managed to watch the fight, you would agree that it's safe to say it was one of the best fights in the 10 years. And if you didn't watch the fight, congratulations, you have something added to your bucket list. Where not only did this fight serve as a testament to how good Izzy's striking was, but it also served as a testament to how good Izzy's cardio was, how durable Izzy was, and just Izzy's willingness to win. And on a side note, also served as a testament to how resilient Kelvin Gastelum is. Could not count the amount of punches that guy blocked with his face. And still he was fighting. And still he was competing with Izzy. But Izzy got crowned the interim middleweight champion and was set to face Robert Whittaker, who at the time was the middleweight champion. And at the time was considered to be one of the best middleweights the UFC has ever seen. So the interim champion, Israel Adesanya, is set to face the normal middleweight champion, Robert Whittaker, to unify the belts, and the winner of that fight will just be the middleweight champion. And the fight was scheduled in Australia, where Rob had the home ground advantage. Seeing that Robert Whittaker was born in New Zealand but moved to Australia and is considered to be an Australian. Now, with regards to the fight, Izzy dominated the fight, where he basically slipped all of Rob's punches, Rob being a good kickboxer, but Izzy obviously being at the pinnacle of kickboxing. Slipped a lot of Rob's punches, and at the latter end of the round, in the last seconds, knocked Rob down. But then Rob got saved by the bell and lived to see the second round. Where in the second round, to the astonishment of a lot of people, Izzy did the exact same thing again, but only this time managed to knock Robert Whittaker out. Now, this is a Robert Whittaker who has faced a plethora of devastating strikers inside of the UFC, and seeing him get knocked out in that fashion was something to behold. Even though everybody loves Robert Whittaker, big fan, it was incredible to see how someone could outperform Rob striking and basically pick Rob apart in the manner that Izzy did, right? So then Izzy decided And this should serve as a testament to Izzy's title win. That in his first title defense, he will defend his middleweight belt against one of the scariest men to ever walk on the face of the earth. Now, if ever you have an argument with someone and they don't believe in the boogeyman, show him or her this person. Because this person is a living testament to being a boogeyman, a man who has a living eulogy of fighters within the middleweight division that would preferably not face it. Because he might end up permanently letting you to rest. A guy that it feels like he's on a experiment to see whether he could actually knock your head clean off your shoulders. And the guy's name's Romero. And he looks like this. In his 40s. So Izzy decided that he would defend his belt against Romero, someone who a lot of fighters in the middleweight division preferred not to fight. Because Yoel is an extremely durable fighter. You basically have to use a sledgehammer to get him out of the fight. And Izzy decided he would fight him. Now, if you didn't watch the fight, it wasn't spectacular. Seeing that both fighters are regarded as being a counter striker, right? So it takes two to tango. Neither of them wanted to, right? So basically, both guys being considered to be counter strikers, and nobody really initiating anything. And Izzy ended up winning, but still, a lot of credit to Izzy, who actually decided that he would defend his belt against Romero. And then Izzy defended his belt against someone who is about as stacked as a pack of cards. This guy is jacked, dax, whatever you want to call it. He is everything and more. A lot of people thought brother might be in the wrong sport, might consider doing something else. And not only was Paulo Costa at the time obviously massive, but he had devastating power. Right? He had horsepower in those punches. And he managed to be undefeated at the time. And Izzy defended his belt against Paulo Costa. And not only defended his belt against Costa, managed to knock Costa out. And never been seen before experience pertaining to Paulo Costa. Izzy knocked him out clean. Just basically emphasizing how good Izzy's striking is, where it didn't even feel close. It felt like Izzy showcased what levels there are to the middleweight division by putting an exclamation mark on just how dominant he is. So Izzy then, being at the peak of his powers, decided that he wants to be a champion in multiple divisions, meaning that he was currently the champion of the middleweight division and wanted to move up to the light heavyweight division and beat the champion to be a double champion. And basically standing in his way was none other than legendary Polish power himself, Jan Blachowicz, who at the time was devastating, right? Had a lot of power and basically just a really good all-round fighter. And Izzy lost that fight, seeing that even though Izzy moved up a weight class, he didn't actually move up in weight. Usually when a fighter moves up in a weight class, they basically be at that weight. Seeing that Izzy fought at 185 and moved up to the 205-pound light heavyweight division, but he didn't actually fight Jan Blachowicz at 205. Seeing that Izzy was basically 188 pounds at the time, and you can safely assume that Jan Blachowicz was probably about 215 to 220 pounds the night of the fight in the octagon. And Izzy basically said that he didn't want to sacrifice his speed for power, because in essence, that's basically what you do. Right? You gain weight, meaning you lose speed, but you gain strength. And Jan basically exploited that. by being able to take Izzy down much more comfortably than anybody has within the middleweight division. And Jan ended up winning that fight. So what was next for Izzy? He then decided to go back down to middleweight, where he basically serves as the king. And managed to do so for a long time, where he basically beat Marvin Vettori in their second fight via unanimous decision. Went on to beat Robert Whittaker again in their second fight via unanimous decision. Went on to beat Janet Cannonier and dominating Cannonier and win via unanimous decision. And then people thought, what would be next for Izzy? Who can actually enter the middleweight division and be somewhat of a threat to Israel Adesanya? And then we saw the guy who could beat Izzy at 185. And out of the 10 scariest people to ever walk on this planet, Alex Pereira is probably 3 of them. Okay, this guy encapsulates everything pertaining to what makes a person scary or not. The intimidating factor, and being able to back it up with power probably never been seen before. And Izzy and Alex had history. When Izzy and Alex actually fought in Glory Kickboxing, and Alex managed to beat Izzy twice. Once via points and going to the judges, and the second time knocking Izzy out in devastating fashion, where it looked like an ambulance was probably needed. So at the time, when Izzy fought Cannonier, when he fought Robert Whittaker, Alex Pereira made his debut in the middleweight division. And he was signed to the UFC, made his debut, and knocked his opponent out in his first fight, won his second fight, and then knocked out Sean Strickland in his third fight, setting him up for a middleweight title bout with Israel Adesanya. Now this was the third time they've faced one another in their coveted careers, right? Twice in kickboxing and now in mixed martial arts. And a lot was made about the fight, seeing that if ever Izzy had a weakness, it would probably be this guy. And then when they fought, for the first 4 rounds, Izzy was cruising. It felt like Izzy picked Alex Pereira apart from the outside, and Izzy dictated the fight. And then we saw what Alex Pereira is all about. Then we saw the downfall of Israel Adesanya, where Alex Pereira knocked Izzy out. Now he didn't knock him out clean, it was a TKO, but Alex went on to win that fight and became the middleweight champion, the first guy to beat Israel Adesanya at middleweight. And it felt like the end of that chapter. But little did we know that Izzy had the last laugh. They were scheduled for a rematch, seeing that Izzy was at the time a 6-time defending middleweight champion. He was warranted an immediate rematch. Right? He got it, and he fought Alex Pereira, and they faced each other for a 4th time. And in that fight, it looked like it was a replica of the first fight, except for now Izzy wasn't dominating, Alex Pereira was. And Alex Pereira was dominating the fight up until the 2nd round, where Izzy was basically up against the cage and Alex Pereira was just basically swinging bombs. And Izzy played possum and looked like he was hurt and waited for the right opportunity to present itself. And he knocked Alex Pereira out cold. And we all thought the king is back. We all thought that Izzy was back and that Izzy would be champion for a long time. And that the story probably had its end. Where a lot of people thought that there was a trilogy, but then Alex Pereira decided he was going to move up in weight just because of the cut was too much for him. It was too much weight for him to lose to fight at 185. So then Alex Pereira moved up to 205. So we thought that that was the only guy that could possibly beat Israel Adesanya, and he's gone. And then at the time, As Alex Pereira was making name inside of the UFC, another middleweight was also establishing himself as a perennial top middleweight inside of the UFC, and the guy's name is Dricus du Plessis. And after Dricus beat Robert Whittaker for a number one contender spot to face the middleweight champion, Izzy and Dricus was scheduled to fight in Australia in 2023 on September the 9th, right? And at the time, Dricus du Plessis pulled out of the fight due to the fact that he had broken his foot and he needed surgery on his foot, so he pulled out of the fight. And then obviously the UFC, doing what it usually does, got a last minute substitution to replace Dricus to fight Izzy for the middleweight championship at the time. And the fighter's name was Sean Strickland. Now, going into the fight, nobody in their right mind, nobody who would be considered to be a fair amount of sane, gave Sean Strickland any chance to be able to beat Israel Adesanya. Just because of the fact that Adesanya is so quick and he's such a decorated striker that nobody saw Sean even competing. And then we saw Sean Strickland dominate Israel Adesanya in Australia. And Sean became the new middleweight champion of the UFC. Then Sean got scheduled to fight Dricus du Plessis. Dricus du Plessis then managed to beat Sean Strickland and was now the new middleweight champion. And Izzy, after losing to Sean Strickland, took a bit of time off. He took a little bit of a sabbatical just to regroup and try and get that motivation to be able to go inside of the octagon once again. But seeing Dricus win the belt, it felt like an immediate spark for Israel Adesanya because they had a lot of beef. Dricus basically saying that he was the first real African champion, seeing that he resides in Africa, where Izzy doesn't really count as being an African champion because even though he was born in Nigeria, he moved to China, moved to New Zealand. So obviously, as you could imagine, that frustrated Izzy a lot. And Izzy had a lot to say about that particular argument. And the UFC scheduled the fight. One of the most highly anticipated fights the middleweight division has probably ever seen. Where Dricus, even though being dominant inside of the UFC, a lot of people felt like he wasn't a good fighter just because of the awkward way he fights, the way he basically never takes a step backwards. He has wild punches, he has wild wrestling techniques, but he is dominant. And a lot of people thought Izzy would pick him apart just because of Izzy's superiority when it came to kickboxing. And then in the fight, we saw it being a very level fight, right? With both fighters having their chances, both fighters having the momentum at a certain point in the fight. And then Dricus managed to submit Izzy with a rear naked choke. And it was the first submission loss in Izzy's professional career of mixed martial arts. So this is the first time ever where Izzy has had back-to-back losses and is now set to face Nassourdine Imavov this weekend. Now, just to give you the stat that I promised, this will be the first time in 13 fights where Israel Adesanya is not fighting for a belt, meaning that in his prior 12 fights leading up to this one, Izzy has fought for a belt every single time. And that is just a testament to how dominant Izzy has been, as well as his longevity inside of the sport, where it is impossible to be fighting for a belt 12 consecutive times if you're either not dominant or if you don't have the skill set that Izzy has had. So honestly, a great career. Now, whether you like him as a fighter or not, you cannot refute the fact that he has put on spectacle after spectacle after spectacle and might be the most decorated striker the UFC has ever seen. In his peak, Israel Adesanya is probably the best striker the UFC has ever seen. It's either him or Anderson Silva. That'd be my argument. That is basically how Izzy got it. Now let me know in the comment section which Izzy fight impressed you the most. And with regards to the fight this weekend between Izzy and Nassourdine Imavov, who do you think's gonna win?